What is going on, Colts Nation? Welcome back to another episode of Bring the Juice. Your guys, Cody and Derek, back for another one, guys. And the NFL draft has come and gone. The Indianapolis Colts had 9 picks in the 2024 NFL draft. In today's episode, just like we do every year post-draft, we want to talk about some players who are impacted by this draft, both positively and negatively in this draft. So with that being said, before we get into this, guys, just want to remind you this episode is presented by PrizePicks. Be sure to visit prizepicks.com or use their app. When you sign up, use the code BTJ for a $100 deposit match. All right, Derek, let's jump into the positives. Some guys who are majorly impacted in the positives for the Indianapolis Colts. Of course, we have to start with the man himself. We made a separate video about this because we felt like he was impacted in such a positive way. Of course, the young signal caller for the Colts, Anthony Richardson, was impacted in a very positive way for a bunch of different reasons. Derek, what were those reasons why we put AR here?
Well, I mean, of course, when you talk about Anthony Richardson, you're talking about some of the weapons that you're able to add. Anthony Gold, Adonai Mitchell, being able to bring in some extra weapons to just be able to open up the floor for him. I mean, you have Pittman, you have Josh Downs, Alec Pierce, who can stretch the field, but it's never a bad idea to always have more weapons just to be able to go to and make your quarterback's life a little bit easier. And of course, one other thing they did was they went out and got the offensive line depth with Matt. I mean, you want to pronounce his name for me again? Because you're saying it different now than what we used to say it.
Yeah, so I heard the C is like a different pronunciation, so it's not what we've been calling Goncalves. I've heard Gonzalez, so kind of very close to Gonzalez. So Gonzalez is what I'm going to go with until I'm told differently. But yeah, you're right. Matt Gonzalez. And then obviously we know what they did with Tanner Bortolini in round 4. So back-to-back linemen that in the immediate, Derek, they are definitely quality depth guys. And I know we'll talk about in a little bit about that right guard spot potentially for the negatives, and we'll jump into that. But yeah, you're right. I mean, the Indianapolis Colts did a great thing for Anthony Richardson, getting him 2 very explosive weapons because, as small as Gold is, he's got the explosion. He's probably going to factor in immediately as a return guy, but also, Derek, he's got a little bit of juice in him. He really does. Even the fact that he's very undersized. I mean, this guy's got elite traits across the board, except for that obvious height and weight. So definitely think the Colts have done a great thing for Anthony Richardson, surrounding him with that young talent. And I don't know if you know this, Derek, but it was only a couple months in age between Richardson and Adonai Mitchell. They're like very close in age. So, I mean, a guy that he can grow with here, I think is absolutely great. And so I think the Colts did a great thing by surrounding AR with all of this talent and protection.
Yeah, 100%. You bring in those weapons, but you also are bringing in the protection, and it's definitely going to be a great thing for him. The next player that we could talk about, and somebody that was a positive for the draft impact, was Michael Pittman. And this mainly just comes off the fact that Adonai Mitchell gets added to this wide receiver room and Anthony Gold. And, Cody, we obviously get it that Michael Pittman was signed here under this big contract. So we know he's not going anywhere. We know he's going to remain the main bell cow of this offense moving forward. But he's not the one that should be worried about his job being taken from Adonai Mitchell. It's more of a different sort of player that we'll talk about later. But Pittman, if you have this situation now, Pittman was the only guy that was really putting any fear in any defenses. Now, obviously, Josh Downs gets a chance to exploit a little bit more this year as well. But adding those other weapons also helps Pittman a lot.
Yeah, I mean, Pittman, we talked about how valuable he was to the offense last year. I mean, that one game where he missed, the offense went into complete neutral. So the fact that you have another guy in there that can help take the pressure off of him, right? And I think just in the offense in general, it's going to help out in so many ways to actually have another legit threat out there, on the outside. I think that's definitely a great thing. So you're right. It's definitely going to help Michael Pittman because while he still, I think, will lead the Colts in targets like he's done the last number of years, having another guy, another weapon like Mitchell, who the Colts hopefully will target, and he has that big playability, will definitely help take the pressure off of Pittman and maybe get him, some more open looks as well. Maybe Mitchell is just tearing up a defense and they have to go double cover him. That allows Pittman to do some work. So I think it's great to add another weapon, another way that the Colts can attack and just get Michael Pittman more looks. So I definitely think adding another receiver here, it's not taking, like you mentioned, Pittman's job, but it's making his job a little bit easier. So absolutely there. And then you got to jump over to the defensive side of things real quick, Derek, because I think DeForest Buckner is a major winner here for a lot of reasons. I think number one, I think it's just great that DeForest Buckner now has a little bit of help on the edge. He has a little bit of help. He's never really had that elite guy on the edge. DeForest Buckner's been a Pro Bowl borderline elite defensive tackle, 3-tech, since he's come to Indianapolis. He's been one of the best 3-techs in the NFL, but he's never had a guy on the edge that you would even make that claim without looking completely ridiculous. Now, not saying that right away Latu is going to be that guy, but he has the potential, even in year one, to get double-digit sacks. I mean, that's not just something we're saying. That's something experts are saying. People who have studied Latu on film say he has the ability to do that from year one, from his rookie season. And so I think just giving DeForest Buckner, man, just some more help and potentially similar to Michael Pittman, giving him potentially some more one-on-one opportunities is only going to help DeForest Buckner in the long term. And, his sack numbers have never been crazy, but maybe now he gets more of these opportunities, to add some more stats. We already know he's a fantastic player, but maybe now his sack numbers go up a little bit because teams aren't just focusing on him when it comes to getting after the passer anymore. They've got a lot more to worry about with Latu. So definitely an interesting thing there. What are your thoughts here on DeForest Buckner being a big winner?
The biggest aspect of this is if DeForest Buckner is in a situation where he's still going to demand the most double teams of any player on this defensive line. Everyone knows, even if Latu is at the end of the season and he's recording a double-digit sack season, guarantee that DeForest Buckner is still going to demand the majority of the double teams because he's just that impactful. Everyone already knows that. But it is one of those things where you might potentially now have a guy in Latu that can come in and take advantage of the fact that he's not getting double teamed off the edge. We saw a lot. There's some tape that I was watching, Cody, where Latu is getting double teamed, sometimes even triple teamed by certain teams. That's how important it was to be slowing down Latu in games. So if you can get a guy like that to consistently see only single coverage when it comes to pass protection, then that's exactly what you would want. It may not necessarily help DeForest Buckner in the sense of his stats per se, but it does help the whole defensive line in the sense that you now have a guy that can take advantage of the matchups that are being presented, which is the majority of the time DeForest Buckner is going to take on two responsibilities versus Latu only having to deal with one.
Yeah, and but on the flip side of it, if Latu's just wrecking a game and they're we have to double team him, that could present some opportunities for Buckner as well. So I think it goes both ways. Immediately, obviously Buckner's the guy, but if Latu fills his potential like we think he could, even in year one, that's just going to be so helpful for not just DeForest Buckner, but for everybody, right, on that defensive line. So definitely great. And then I think the final one, Derek, just because, number one, obviously Latu's a part of that, but number two, the fact that the Colts really didn't address it in any major way in the first couple of days. This young secondary, at least right now, I think they got impacted in a very positive way. The Colts, especially at corner, again, we'll see what happens with the safety market, but especially at corner, the Colts are really, I think, content with their guys, and they really believe in their guys. A lot of young guys in there last year, but the Colts are not budging on their belief that these young guys, they have the potential, they believe, to be really young, good players in this league, and they're backing that. They're not just talking the talk, they're walking the walk so far. So talk to me about this young secondary for the Colts, and while I know a lot of people were I can't believe the Colts didn't address it any earlier than they did, this certainly was a positive thing for all those players in that DB room, especially the corner room.
Yeah, I mean, we talked about the fact that Chris Ballard wants continuity with this unit. And that pretty much confirmed it. You not only drafted a guy in as a free safety, but you're going to convert him to a linebacker because his skill set just matches that more of a linebacker than a safety. Obviously, Jalen Simpson, he's going to be added to the room. And we had a couple other guys get brought in, but nobody early on that's going to immediately starting to take somebody's job. So it is more of that process where Chris Ballard is saying, hey, we do trust these guys. We want to see them, actually go out and do something that we really expect them to be able to handle. So I think that it definitely, for this young secondary, it's going to provide them a lot of chances to once again prove Chris Ballard right and give some guys a chance to, be able to build on what they were trying to do last year.
Yep. And it'll definitely be nice for this young secondary, especially the corners, to actually have like a full offseason together, because obviously Juju Brent didn't have some of this spring work. So you wonder how much value is that going to add to his game this year and just his maturity as a player. So really intrigued to see that. Now let's move on to some of the negatives. Now we don't have as many negatives as maybe we've had in the past, but we've identified 3 guys, Derek, that we believe could be negatively impacted by this, whether that's this year or maybe moving forward. Who are some of those guys? Let's start with the first guy, because you already mentioned, one of these wide receivers. Who would that be, and why do you think he potentially is negatively impacted here?
Well, the first guy that's going to get mentioned here is Alec Pierce. The main aspect of this is Alec Pierce is in a position where that X wide receiver spot, Adonai Mitchell's coming for that particular spot. That is going to be a thing where Alec Pierce, albeit Alec Pierce is a much better and more willing blocker than Adonai Mitchell, which is what gives Alec Pierce the edge in that sort of category, which means that the Colts are not going to divert away from Alec Pierce in any stretch. But we're hoping this year that this is the year that Alec Pierce started showing himself a little bit more, because you're going to finally have a quarterback this year. This is the year where, like, hey, you start making more of those big plays down the field that we know you can make because you have that speed. And a lot of times defenses just don't account for you the same way. This is kind of that year where we thought this is what's going to happen. Well, now you have Adonai Mitchell added to the mix, and you have Anthony Gold, who also has that same kind of speed that you have, albeit he's not 6'3", but he has your speed. So, it feels not necessarily that Alec Pierce's job is on the line, but how much his role is impacted definitely matters for this offseason and how he produces in the games, and especially during training camp when all the coaches' eyes are on you. So that his role is definitely going to be interesting to see and follow, with Adonai Mitchell now being in the building. As we said, guys, today's episode is sponsored by PrizePicks. Now, what is PrizePicks? PrizePicks is the largest daily fantasy sports platform in North America. Instead of battling against thousands of other players across platforms, you're basically picking 2 to 6 player stat projections, and you're choosing more or less on those stat projections to be able to watch those winnings roll in. It's very easy. Do you guys want to play along at some of PrizePicks' favorite players like rapper Meek Mill and UFC fighter Sugar Sean O'Malley? Well, if you guys sign up today, you can find the community plays under the promos tab of the app to view the entries of some of the biggest names on the platform and be a part of that as well. You can now win up to 100 times your money on PrizePicks with as little as 4 correct picks. You can turn $10 into $1,000 just like that with NBA, NHL, and college basketball entries today on PrizePicks, America's #1 fantasy sports app. Like a lot of other things, guys, they also offer injury insurance, so your entries stay in play even if one of your players gets injured. So if someone exits the game in the first half and does not return in the second, that player projection won't count against you, and the rest of your entry stays live. So it's a great bounce back for that one. what I love about the app as well, guys, is it's not just sports like NBA, NHL, football, and tennis, and baseball, and all these other things, but there's also a lot of others that go into it as well. If you like to place entries on video game situations like Call of Duty, CS2, Apex, if that's something that appeals to you, there's a wide variety of sports and video games and everything else that you can place entries on. And I love how expansive it is. Even just looking at the NBA, there's entries you can make with turnovers, with points. You can do combo deals, dunks, field goals attempted, all these different things. So there's just so many different ways to make money off of these entries. Be sure to download the app today and use code BTJ for a first deposit match up to $100. Again, download the app today and use code BTJ for a first deposit match up to $100. Again, it's sponsored by PrizePicks. Pick more, pick less. It's that easy.
It's going to be quite interesting because I don't know if you heard this stat, Derek, but Alec Pierce had the most snaps of any wide receiver on the Colts last year, right? By a pretty wide margin. I mean, he had a ton of snaps. He didn't miss a game. He was out there, and he only had, 35 catches? So, again, you can point to quarterback play. You can point to some of this stuff, but Alec Pierce was out there a ton in 2023, and now you just wonder, how much are those snaps going to be decreased with Adonai Mitchell? Is it more of a 50-50 split where instead of over 1,000 snaps on offense, he has somewhere like 500 or 600, or even less than that. So that is a real legitimate question for Alec Pierce is what is his role like? It's certainly going to be diminished in some capacity, but to what capacity is it going to be diminished here? But I do think maybe it is in kind of a roundabout way, even though we do say it is a negative. It could be a positive for Alec Pierce. It could kind of be the kick in the butt that he needs in certain ways to get some of these things figured out. We mentioned he's kind of a one-trick pony in a lot of ways. Maybe this is kind of a wake-up call hey, we can't just have you just be doing this. As much as we love that part of you, you got to become more well-rounded as a wide receiver. If you want to be a part of this team's, present and future, well, I don't think Alec Pierce's job is necessarily in peril. I think he'll still see the field. I don't think he's going to just be a reserve guy. I do think, when looking forward, this is certainly a question of where does Alec Pierce fit into this offense? That is a question mark that you have. And, Alec Pierce has a couple more years left on his rookie deal. So he has to prove that he belongs in this wide receiver room because it's obvious the Colts weren't content with where they were and they wanted to add some more playmaking ability. And you're right. I mean, even Gold, Ballard's talked him up a ton since they drafted him. I know he's a little bit undersized, but he's got that electric speed and athleticism you're looking for too. So I don't think it's going to be as much of a cakewalk as maybe it was last year where we're all yeah, Alec Pierce is a clear-cut number 2 guy. That's not so much the case anymore. So I think it could be a good thing for Alec Pierce, but in terms of overall his, seeing the field, we'll see. But I think it potentially could be a negative thing. Let's move on to another guy here, Derek. Speaking of the draft in the early rounds, that I think a guy that's majorly impacted here is Paye, right? Another guy, a former high-round pick that necessarily hasn't lived up to the hype, right? Obviously, he's dealt with some injuries. I know you talked about just a couple days ago here from the time this video is out. You talked about the option of picking up his 5th-year option. At this point, we will probably know what the Colts have done. We don't know right now because we're recording this a couple days before the deadline. But regardless of what the Colts do, I think it's pretty obvious to say that Paye's role, last year even, he got benched on those NASCAR, IndyCar packages, those third down packages for Tyquan Lewis. So you think if he got benched for that, now you throw Latu into the mix, who also, mind you, is not just a one-trick pony. He's a 3-down type of guy, although obviously we know he excels very much in getting after the quarterback. I mean, this dude led the NCAA in tackles for loss last year, Derek. So, this guy can play the run just as well. So, Quiddy, I mean, really his one trick is that run stopping. He's a very good run stopper, no question about that. But, I mean, Derek, you can be a good run stopper all day, but especially at edge, if you don't have that juice when it comes to getting after the quarterback, and, I mean, we dive in a little deeper past the 8 sacks and you look a little bit more into, the pass rush percentage and stuff like that, it's ugly for Paye. It wasn't great last year. So what do the Indianapolis Colts do? I guess we'll find out. But certainly, Derek, Kwity Paye's not going to have the role he had last year. I don't think he is. He's more of just a 1 and 2 down, and he goes off on third down. But I think it's going to be obvious that his job is definitely not safe, especially the starting job. So, what are your thoughts on that for Kwity Paye and how he definitely, probably out of anybody, even maybe more than Alec Pierce? I mean, he's pretty negatively impacted in terms of his starting status and also just his play percentage.
Yeah, I'd say the amount of, I mean, the difference with it is, Kwity Paye has not established himself as a consistent pass rusher. That is where you're going to see Latu come in a little bit more frequently. So you already know the role of a Kwity Paye is going to diminish throughout the year. And if Latu becomes a consistent run defender, then there might be even more snaps that gets taken away from Kwity Paye from time to time. And Kwitty's just going to be your number one. He's going to be your number 3 edge and that first guy off the bench, to be able to provide some relief every once in a while, which is fine with me. But I mean, we're again talking about a guy that's about to go into the final year of his rookie contract. And like you said, I put up that video of talking about whether or not they should 5th year extend him, that 5th year contract, I should say. Do they actually want to do that? Is it worth that kind of money to do that? And, for a guy that, we don't know if he can get you double-digit sacks consistently, the biggest problem has been just the fact that he gets himself injured. This last year was the first year that we saw Kwity Paye healthy, like all year healthy and not missing games, not missing time. And he still only managed to get 9 sacks on the season. He could still potentially get better, but this is a guy that, we feel as if, and the Colts will never admit this, but we feel as if this is kind of like his peak. Like this is a guy that is a solid edge rusher and a solid run defender. I mean, that's really what he is. He's a solid player. He's not going to ever be elite. He's not going to be bad. We've seen he can be good, but that's about as good as it gets for him. So Latu's got to come in there. Ebukam, who only finished with a half sack more than Kwity on the year, but Ebukam ended up being a little bit more consistent on his pass rush grade, which is what you want to end up seeing from these guys. So Ebukam, I think his job is safe, at least for now, and he's still developing. So I think that, Kwitty's definitely another one of those guys where it's like, I know Ballard is probably going to want to keep him, but his status on the Colts might be in jeopardy after this year if a couple different factors don't go his way this year.
I mean, Derek, I don't know if you'll agree with this, but I look at this Colts edge, especially getting after the passer. You have Latu, you have Ebukam, you have Tyquan Lewis. I would say, Derek, and again, it depends how you view guys like Dio and how you view maybe even a guy like Adi Tamiwa. I think those guys are maybe more interior when it comes to getting after the passer, but let's talk strictly edge rush. Derek, Kwitty's not in my top 3 when it comes to edge, like legitimately getting after the passer. Tyquan Lewis is, in my opinion, tremendously better at getting after the quarterback. I mean, you look at his, more of the advanced stats. I know obviously the sacks are different, but the snaps and the efficiency, Tyquan Lewis was leagues better than Kwity Paye last year getting after the quarterback.
I would take Dio as an edge rush over Kwity any day, too.
Yeah, so if you factor in Dio, he's the 5th best edge at getting after the quarterback. For a guy that was taken in round 1, I mean, that's bust-worthy. I know that's like a big, people are like, oh gosh, that must be he's terrible. That's not what we're saying. But when you draft a guy in the first round, you expect him to be a guy that's going to get after the passer at a consistent rate. And Kwity just hasn't been that. He just hasn't been that. He's been a solid player, like you mentioned, but you don't take a solid player in round 1. You take a player that you hope can be an impact player for your franchise. And Kwity Paye has not been that. You mentioned Ebukam. Ebukam was so much better than Kwity at getting after the quarterback. I mean, Ebukam won you a game or 2 last year. I mean, go to that Tampa Bay game. Ebukam won you that game. When has Kwity Paye in his career done anything of impact getting after the passer? I'll wait, because he hasn't.
There's only been about 1 game that I can recount, and it was like a game a year or 2 ago against the Texans. I think that's about it. As far as like it goes from a consistency standpoint, you're right. Quiddy just doesn't have a lot of games. Yeah, right. The only game that he really took over was that first week game in the 2022 season, if I'm not mistaken, where that game ended up in overtime against the Texans. Quiddy was a big reason as to why we didn't lose that game. But outside of that, you're right. There's not been a lot of other games where Quiddy Paye has asserted himself.
And I would even argue, and I know he'll probably getting on the Quiddy Paye slander here, so this is my last thing I'll say on him, but like, man, I would argue those 8.5 sacks, those were very inflated for Quiddy Paye last year. I mean, none of those sacks, in my opinion, unless I'm remembering wrong, were impactful sacks. A lot of those seemed like they were more cleanup sacks, things that were kind of low impact. So for me, it's like, I mean, like, okay, I would like to have him potentially as like a rotational guy when it comes, especially because we know how good he is at stopping the run. But as a long-term solution to getting after the quarterback, I am just out on him. Now, again, I'll say this. Maybe Charlie Partridge can unlock something else there. Maybe, I know this doesn't happen a lot because you often think like the rookies learn from the veterans, but could a guy like Latu, I mean, he has 3 different pass rush moves. Could Quiddy learn from Latu when it comes to that? I don't know. Because Quiddy doesn't really have that. He doesn't have that in his arsenal. A lot of guys don't have that in their arsenal. So really intrigued, though, to see that. And I made a post a couple days ago just about like Charlie Partridge, one of the best teachers of defensive linemen. He was obviously in college football. We'll see how it translates to the NFL. Like, could he get something more out of some of these guys like Quiddy, Dio, Adi Tomiwa, all these other guys you want to throw in there as well. Obviously, Latu as well in that. But I'm really intrigued to see that. But as it stands right now from what we saw last year, I mean, yeah, Quiddy's definitely, his job's in jeopardy. And we'll see. Maybe he does kind of be the quote-unquote starter, Derek. But, I mean, snap count-wise, when you look at it, I definitely think his snap count's going to go down this year with Latu in here, especially if Latu can come in right away and be an every down type of player. So we'll see on that, but it'll be interesting to see for sure. That's the interesting thing about this defensive line, Derek. It's like you almost have like 2 waves of guys that can come in and play quality football for you, which is just wild.
You have way too many good players on this defensive line right now.
Right.
The Colts are going to have some very interesting decisions to make.
Right. I mean, you could realistically say 10 defensive linemen you could keep, maybe even more. Like, you could make that argument right now. So that's crazy. But anyway, Quiddy Paye, the second guy there, negatively impacted. The last guy, Derek, this is one I'm kind of like maybe next year, but potentially this year. I think out of the 3 that we're talking about, this guy I'm not like the most sold on that he's negatively impacted right away. But maybe next year when he's in a he's in a contract year this year, so maybe next year this could factor in. But we had Will Fries on this list because I think it is an interesting conversation, Derek, when it comes to it, because it's like, I mean, Will Fries was a good guard last year. I mean, average to good guard last year for the Colts, right? I mean, he had a full off season, and he definitely took some steps forward from his first year in 2022. But Derek, we saw what the Colts did on day 2 and then the beginning of day 3. So you do wonder, like, could Will Fries potentially be losing his job even this year at training camp? Because Gonzalez and then potentially even Bordolini can play some guard too. So, like, could we see that competition really heat up and potentially see Will Fries on the bench? Like, I'm not saying it's going to happen, but it could happen because there are these guys that they certainly have talent as well. And, especially with a guy like Gonzalez, I mean, he's a massive human being. So he's a lot bigger than Will Fries and a lot more physically gifted, I think, in certain ways than Will Fries is. Now, obviously, they have to go out there and compete, but I don't think it's a cakewalk for Will Fries to just be cemented in, to that right guard spot. What are your thoughts on Will Fries?
Yeah, I'm with what you originally stated, that this year is probably not the year that I would worry about with Will Fries. Because I firmly believe that Will Fries is going to win the job at right guard. And Chris Ballard even said it last year. We feel confident in Will Fries. He's going to continue to get better. And like I said, he's good enough to where you're not going to mess up the balance of the offensive line. He's not a detriment to the unit, which is good enough in my opinion. Now,
but here's my
going
pushback
into
to that.
Next year, though, is the issue.
Here's my pushback to that real fast before we go to next year. Good enough, okay, good enough, but what if a guy's better? Like, what if Gonzalez is clearly better in training camp? Like, I don't want to settle for good enough, Derek. I want to settle for the best player at that position. That's my push.
Yeah, 100%. I agree. If Gonzalez is better than Will Fries, then 100%. I'd agree with you. It should be Gonzalez at that spot. I just don't know. Like, it would take a lot for Gonzalez to be able to be that level. I don't know if he'll quite reach it in the first year in his first off season. I'm not sold on the idea. And not to mention, like, Gonzalez has to be at a level above Will Fries in order to beat out Will Fries. Like, if they're the same, Will Fries is going to be there. And even if it's like remotely close, where Gonzalez has a few more good days than Will Fries, then Will Fries is still going to win that job at the end of the day. There's got to be a extreme level of difference between Gonzalez and Fries for me to think that the Indianapolis Colts are going to make him the starter for this upcoming season. That's just my opinion. Now, as we said, going into next year, Will Fries is going to, want to get paid because he's going to be a free agent. I don't know I know the Colts will try to keep him because he's been serviceable. He's not been bad. He's worth trying to give a second contract to. Now, is it worth that, though? That's the big question. Because like you said, if Gonzalez is good enough to be at the same level of Will Fries for next year, then why would the Colts need to sign Will Fries if you have someone in the wakes that's less money that you could just sub into that spot anyway, and then in the next draft, just go and get another interior guard that can be the backup for Gonzalez, right? So that's the situation that you find yourself in, because Fries is now in the spot where there's going to be some options for him. And that's where, this negatively impacts you, because we all believe that if Matt is going to be good, which we think he can be, then we're in a spot where Fries may not be the future option at right guard for the Indianapolis Colts.
Yeah, and again, we'll see on that. I mean, I was tempted to put Ryan Kelly on this list, not for this year, but for next year as well, with Tanner Bortolini. But I think Ryan Kelly's proven he's a veteran. He's proven to be playing at a Pro Bowl level even last year. So I didn't have him on this list, but I mean, you can make an argument for any of these guys. I mean, Will Fries, obviously, the less proven guy at this point, and the guy that's played at a lower level, let's be honest. So I think he definitely deserves to be on this list. But guys, that'll do it for this one. Let us know your thoughts here on some players positively and negatively impacted in this draft. Curious what you guys think. Is there anybody that maybe we didn't have on this list? I mean, we were thinking for a while, Derek, and this is kind of all we could come up with. I mean, you can make the argument for another couple other guys. Like I thought about even a guy like Trey Sermon, because the Colts didn't address running back. That definitely was a good thing for him. But there probably some other positions we didn't even talk about that maybe we should have. So curious what you guys think here. Let us know all those things in the comments. That'll do it for this one, guys. Thank you so much for tuning in. And as always, guys, go Colts.